people of Wheat Ridge City Council. We are here tonight, August 17th. We've got two agenda items. We are going to be discussing regulation of e-mobility in the city of Wheat Ridge, and then following that, we are going to discuss regulation of drones. And before we get started, we have oh, yeah, I've got it. I've got the signups right here. We've got Public's Right to Speak, and we have one speaker tonight. We have Kelly Blinn signed up to speak. Kelly, if you would come join us at the podium. You've got 3 minutes to speak on any topic on the agenda. The clerk, okay. This green light that you see here, once it starts, you'll have 3 minutes, and when you have about a minute left, it'll turn yellow. It'll start blinking when you've got 30 seconds, and at 3 minutes, it will turn red. Please feel free to start. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to comment tonight. My name's Kelly Blinn, and I'm with the Wheat Ridge Active Transportation Advisory Team, the ADATS. We're a citizen-led, volunteer-run group that advocates for easy and equitable access to active transportation options. We really appreciate the city taking up the e-mobility issue tonight. And for trying to align as much as possible with our neighboring jurisdictions and with the state. We share the desire to minimize injuries and fatalities associated with speeding and other unsafe usage of certain e-mobility devices, which supports our goal of Vision Zero. At the same time, we want to be really careful to avoid disincentivizing or penalizing people biking and using e-mobility devices safely and legally. In general, we would support many of the recommendations from staff reflected in the questions in the memo, such as adopting the state definitions for e-bikes and perhaps not treating e-motos that can go faster as ordinary bicycles. Though in general, we'd encourage focusing on regulating some of the unsafe behaviors like speeding over the technology itself. On the other hand, we would have some concerns about, for example, the suggestion of requirements for reflective gear or lighting. We think a better place to start might be education, outreach, and provision of lights and reflective gear in partnership with the ADATS and other groups. We also think continuing to increase the availability of bike infrastructure can help avoid conflicts with pedestrians on sidewalks. Finally, we'd welcome the opportunity to partner with the city to conduct outreach on e-mobility opportunities and safe usage, whether with the schools, doing pop-up events on the trail, or providing materials at our events. And on a related note of doing outreach, I work for the state e-bike tax credit is still available, and we are launching the state e-bike rebate program later this month. So some good opportunities to get people onto class 1 through 3 e-bikes. So ultimately, e-mobility can provide really great sustainability and access benefits to our city, but must be navigated thoughtfully. Thanks for the opportunity to comment and for listening.
Great, thank you so much for coming tonight. All right, with that, I failed to mention we have a quorum here this evening, all councilors present, save our mayor who is unable to be with us tonight. Our first item is regulation of e-mobility vehicles, and with that, should I hand it over to Chief Martha to get started?
We're going to discuss e-mobility vehicles, basically e-bikes in general. I think myself and Division Chief Kellogg have educated ourselves to a level we never thought we'd get to, and Chief Kellogg is very conversant now, I think, and has had discussions with many of the folks in Wheat Ridge about e-mobility vehicles. We certainly are interested to hear what council would like us to do, and I've offered up some of the different paths that we could take to sort of restrict it. But essentially, as Chief Kellogg goes through, there's two ends of this spectrum that we can, or you can decide to regulate: the bike itself or the operator of the bike, and whether they have certain rights, responsibilities, licenses, that sort of thing. So Chief Kellogg will go through that, but there is also state law, and we looked at across the country at other states' laws and about how bikes are classified and all those things. So I think all those things will get worked through. I know Mayor Pro Tem Holteen is an expert in this, so at the end, we'll certainly defer to her to weigh in on some of the ideas that we have. But Chief Kellogg, you want to go through the presentation?
Right. Actually, I should queue up that presentation. My apologies, I should have.
While we're waiting for Chief Kellogg, generally speaking, I think there's 3 classes of e-bikes that I'm aware of in most jurisdictions, class 1, 2, and 3. Class 1 being bikes that go up to 20 miles an hour that are human powered. In other words, you have to pedal it to get the assist. Class 2, which is throttle assisted up to 20 miles an hour, and class 3, which is up to 28 miles an hour and pedal assist. Is that correct? Off base there. So that's kind of where we started, assuming that that might be the guidance that we received from council, and we looked into the driver's requirements, and then we looked into the bike requirements that are possible as well. And we'll hear from you tonight on which ones you are interested.
We're working to get the projector working here, but first thing I want to call out though is on my PowerPoint, the front picture is of a farmer. And it took me a while to find that. And so I was quite pleased and started the conversation that way. Quite proud of myself, actually. It doesn't really have a lot to do with e-mobility, but I thought it would be kind of interesting. Yeah. Well, the chief noted we've been chatting about the e-mobility for a little while, and we took a look at this and are really here to seek your guidance as to how we want to proceed. But the big thing is I want to go through here this evening is just kind of set the floor for what we know. And Mayor Pro Tem has been wonderfully helpful. This is actually based on our conversations. Most of this came from that. But just looking for some guidance as to how we move forward. And it's really an interesting, I would even offer a bit of a challenging conversation in this moment. And I'm sure you've paid attention to our sister communities in the Denver metro area who have been working through this topic. And it's a very challenging topic to actually, I suppose, regulate is the word that I would use, to a point that we in this community are comfortable with how they utilize these vehicles. So there are, turn this on maybe. Oh, apologies. There we go. So, excuse me, a general overview of this is just, we're looking at a remarkable increase in e-mobility devices, including e-scooters, e-bikes, self-balancing devices, any number of different electrically propelled vehicles. And our current city code, and I don't like the word lax, but I did use it, it lacks a bit of a comprehensive regulation on these. And so it makes it difficult. Our officers get out and our city parks folks get out, our CSOs get out and try to address this as well as we can. And but it makes it a little bit more difficult. Our prior discussion, and this isn't actually in the memo, but we started down a conversation a little while back, and it outlined predominantly the infrastructure, but I didn't want to leave it out there suggesting that we'd never talked about this. So I just put that in there. Some of the initiatives right now is there's actually a rapid growth of e-mobility across Wheat Ridge, but also the Denver metro area. And as I've been following this, Mayor Pro Tem turned me on to a bunch of great articles. It's actually nationwide. It's really something that several large cities and even several small cities are having, smaller cities or towns are even having to deal with. So it's something that that I think we have to pay attention to in this moment. The e-bikes, the Class 1 and the 2, seem to be the most common locally, although we've been seeing some additions of the Class 3s and then the, I don't know exactly what they're called, the unicycles, and some others. We've seen a remarkable increase in those here recently. And then emerging devices, as I just noted, the one-wheeled present, the devices such as one-wheels present enforcement challenges. So we have some things that we have to address. Including with those challenges are the high-speed travel. So it was remarkable to me the other day to see a young man driving alongside of my vehicle on Wadsworth. I was going 32 miles an hour, and he was keeping pace with me. And I would guess that he was 12 or maybe 13. And so, you know, when I think about that, I think of the fact that, number one, this young man, his decision-making is not fully developed yet, and it made me very nervous. And as a grandfather and a father, boy, it really spoke to me. and it really made me very nervous, especially as I was starting to get down the path of this conversation with you. We have conflicts on the sidewalks and in dense pedestrian areas. We had some issues that we had to deal with at Dominic's on the Green honorarium day that we had. The unpredictable roadway behaviors and underage riders, I just kind of outlined what I had just experienced recently, and then some night riding without lights and distracted riding. Many of these bikes are black, and some of these kids are wearing black. It makes it really quite difficult, even with as well lit as the city of Wheat Ridge is, it still makes it quite difficult. And then, of course, the outdated, it's not just outdated, we really are kind of limited to and restricted in what kind of language we do have as it relates to how we deal with this and how we identify these things. We've seen through, Mayor Pro Tem provided some interesting data. I believe it was you who, did you add that, the data to the memo? Or that was you? Yeah, so we've seen the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission reported in April of 26 that 533 micromobility-related fatalities were reported nationally from 2017 to 2024, including 310 involving e-bikes, which was actually quite remarkable to me. It was something that really caught my attention. And so I think it's something I feel very strongly that we need to pay attention to it. That's embarrassing. The opportunities, sorry. I thought I read this through several times. Spelled correctly. Neighboring cities have adopted clear and comprehensive regulations. Arvada's ordinance, I think, actually does a pretty good job, and Lakewood's, I think, is reasonable as well. The regional consistency improves safety and predictability. Our speaker earlier mentioned the importance of aligning our approach to these things as best we can. And then, as I just noted, the chance to align definitions, operating rules, and enforcement authority. This scenario, this situation gives us that opportunity. Our future plans, at least, that's, I think, in your hands, is just basically a request for guidance on pursuing an ordinance and what that ultimately looks like and how it best fits our community and how we best serve our community. The structured review of other cities' ordinances is recommended. I included that in the memo. And then potential development of model ordinance language. I don't know where we're at with that, but I think we certainly have some things to start from. Community education materials to accompany any ordinance. I know that was a big concern for Mayor Pro Tem. And we'll utilize our social media, we'll use signage, we'll partner with the bike shops in the areas and the schools in the areas to see if we can get some of those educational points in. I think what we're going to also need to do, though, is pay attention to those that are not necessarily going to school or spending time in the bike shops. So I think that social media presence will be something that will be beneficial. And then we have Alex, our PIO, has a remarkable network. I think we could even utilize some of our local news stations to get some of the information out, as he's done so often and so well in the last couple of years. And lastly, we could assess the interest from commercial e-mobility vendors, and I just mentioned that. But I really think the partnership with the local bike shops is something that will really propel this in a direction that that would benefit us remarkably well. And I guess there's some questions that we can open the floor to if you have any.
Thank you both chiefs for opening us up and providing that information. And I will go ahead and open the floor for discussion. Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I do have some questions. There's a little bit of confusion, at least for me. So there's 3 different classes of the e-bikes, and the one that the class 3 says it cuts off at 28. But what I heard from the police department is that we were seeing bikes that were going 32, so that would not check the box for class 3. And then when I look on electric mopeds and low-speed electric motorcycles, there's not a lot of information of what is that definition. But what I did see when I was out bicycling on my non-electric bicycle in Golden was that Golden has a different classification, and they break it down into a 750 watt or under is an e-bike, legal to operate without a license, and a 751 watt to 4,476 watt is a low power scooter that requires driver's license, registration, insurance. And then over a 4,476 watt motorcycle requires motorcycle license, registration, insurance. And when I Googled the 4,000 watt, it said the speeds were, 45 to maybe 55 miles an hour. And I'm just wondering how, so that's one different kind of lens versus the other class. And I just wonder, like if I am a consumer and I'm trying to figure out, I got something that goes 32 miles an hour, and I could tell you what the watt is, that's easy enough, and I could probably tell you the speed, but it's like, where does it fit into this bucket, and what's going to be the easiest for consumers as we say, like, well, it's an e-bike, class 1, 2, 3, are we thinking about creating more classes, 4, 5, 6, or do we start assigning watts, like different watts like Golden is doing, to say like these are the buckets that's the questions I have. Thank you.
I would suggest that in many of the definitions I've read, it includes both in one definition. So up to 750 watts, and then you go outside of the bucket into something else. Now, it gets confusing where there's hybrid bikes where you can switch between a class 1, 2, and 3, and then there's modifications to these bikes that put them over the speed limit, so people can do that. I think there's a restrictor or a governor on the bikes that controls the speed, and people can tamper with that and play with that. There are some jurisdictions that require markings on the bike to tell you what it's rated, but a lot of them say, a class 2 bike or class 3 bike is up to 750 watts and 28 miles an hour. So it's not, I don't think we would want to create 10 different classes to be confusing. I think it can all be encompassed in the definitions we generally have now. It's just a matter of syncing up the wattage to the speed and making sure those are what were acceptable for this group. But 750 seems to be the accepted wattage level for the class bikes that it seems like, and I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth, it seems like we might accept here in Wheat Ridge those 3 bikes with certain restrictions potentially on a class 3 bike over a class 1 and 2 bike, but 750 watts would be the upper limit for that. And then just to touch on the other point, we're really talking about e-bikes, but as Chief Kellogg noted, it's hard to create an ordinance that really handles everything, those unicycles and scooters and everything else, because they all fall into different sort of categories as to what it is that propels them, what wattage level for a scooter versus a bike. So it gets a little more complicated, and I'm sure you'll hear about that as we go through. But I don't suggest that we make it any more complicated than it is, and we include the definitions together. Class 3 up to 750 watt bike is generally, and then we could call an e-motorcycle something over that. And that's really something that a lot of jurisdictions will suggest that at that level you need a license, or you need to meet the requirements of, of what we would call more of a regular motor vehicle conveyance type of conveyance in that situation. So, I don't know if that answers your question in total, but that's what we're thinking.
Yes, Councilmember Larson.
And thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Two questions. Mentioned there is already in our code a section that sort of broadly defines, but is not big enough. And I've not been able to find that. So, and if we were able to put something together that would alter that code, would it go in the same place, or would we move it somewhere else?
I guess I'll defer to Mr. Dahl on that.
Pardon me, depending on how much detail we end up with on, as both the chief and Chief Kellogg have said, the bike itself and the rider, depending on that level of volume, we might want to create a separate article on e-bikes and e-vehicles. But I guess I'd be inclined, fair question. I've faced this in other places where you do a little tinkering, you can say where it is, but there's kind of a threshold point where you need to have an article, a separate article in the lieutenant's title, but have its definitions, and then lead to the enforcement tools and requirements.
Would this be,
aware of that
I'm
need.
sorry.
I'm aware of that need, and I guess I suggest that once we get direction from council on kind of the volume of what you want to do, I can easily figure out where to land.
And I'm going to just throw a couple of ideas out here. Would it be under nuisance, our nuisance statute, or under public safety, or
Could be vehicles and traffic.
vehicles and traffic? And vehicles and traffic is in, is it under police or chapter 13? Thank you. And that is municipal motor vehicles and traffic, and that makes the most sense since you're talking about motor vehicles and traffic.
This is, sorry. Yeah,
Great.
so-
No, that answers that question. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Snell.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I wanted to just call out and go back to the situation that DC Kellogg called out with, when I was thinking about this and researching, the main concern that I have around these is that section of the population that's using e-bikes and largely e-motos that are young, and it's hard to tell how old anyone is, but I'm guessing that assumption that person was around 12 is, I mean, that's.
Felt that way to me.
Yeah. And I feel like I see this a lot, a good amount, whether it's here in Wheat Ridge, whether it's, just over in Golden or in Edgewater. I see this a lot where kids are riding these bikes that are incredibly powerful, that are really meant for off-road use. And I feel like I'd like to just explore a little bit what it looks like for a minor to be operating this with no supervision or, no sort of guidance, and exhibiting some behaviors that are going to hurt them eventually. I'm really also not interested in regulating this so much because I do feel like Colorado's tax credit is super beneficial. I think the majority of e-bike users are really benefiting from this and how they get to work, how they get to the store. And so I certainly don't want to penalize anyone, but I'd like to just explore what that looks like a little bit when it comes to minors. Thank you.
Well, I think one of the things that we can certainly identify, and you know, I prepared, because I had these same questions. I'm still wondering, how do we proceed? What's the most effective and efficient, productive way? And so one of the things is that we've had reoccurring issues with the underage riders, and I think that, and Mr. Dahl, please correct me, but I feel like we can certainly require a certain age, and certainly require, and in the same area, I was talking about night riding, and require lights, and identify some of the issues surrounding the high-speed travel where we can regulate that and address that. So I certainly think that we can identify an age in conjunction with the wattage and so on and so forth that will allow us to feel like we're honoring our community values while also honoring the real true benefits that these e-mobility devices have allowed for.
I mean, generally, kids grew up with bikes and they were in the street, so we're not, you know, we're of two minds because they didn't have bikes that generally could propel them in the same way. So these are young riders, potentially, you know, 10, 11, 12 years old, riding a bike without the experience of somebody who has a driver's license or who has existed in traffic. As I was coming over here today, I saw a young person riding in the bike lane, but the wrong way. And it's hard to explain to them that when people pull out of an intersection, they look to their left. That's natural. They don't always check for people coming the wrong way in a bike lane, but they don't have the experience because they're not a driver. So we see in Denver where they're trying to create a contract that requires the GPS to stop their bike riding on the sidewalk. So it would limit that, but it's so far been unsuccessful. But so that forces those bikes into the street. And that's where we have the conflict. And I think that's why there's so many deaths, because you are the bumper when you're riding one of those. So we want to be really careful about how we protect young folks, especially. I think if we're just in the mindset that it's just people commuting, that we're wrong, because those folks will do it responsibly if they're going to a job and they're that age where they can get a job. But our young folks are also going to be following those people and not understanding that they don't know the rules of the road. So that's where the concern is for us as a police department.
Great, thank you. I'm going to jump in and then call on Counselor Martell. So as everyone here knows, this is near and dear to my heart. I did ride an e-bike to get here tonight. A couple things I just want to name and then sort of share some of my thinking. One of the big elephants in the room is that there is a global industry that's trying to outsmart whatever we do here, in that there is like a high caliber marketing of non-compliant e-bikes to kids, and you can buy them at Costco. Costco has since scaled back on that, but we have national retailers that are packaging things that are being packaged as e-bikes when in fact they can go well over 30 miles an hour, and they on the packaging show young kids on them. So like that's a hard battle for us. So when I really think about like what's the framework of concern and like impact in our own community, I think of a couple things. One is, and has been stated here, how do we create like a clear regulatory framework in which we can enforce what's safe for kids to be on and not on? And that's really done by speed and motor power. And, just like a car, we require a license. And so I really think about like kids riding anywhere on a motorized vehicle, like how do we regulate that in a way that we're keeping them safe? Secondly, I think about safe travel on any mobility device in our multi-use trails. We all are on the Clear Creek Trail. I get passed on my e-bike by people not on e-bikes more often than people on e-bikes. So I just want to make mention that if we're talking about speed travel on multi-use trails, I really encourage us not to focus just on e-mobility, because if the speed limit's 15 miles an hour, a lot of the bikes that are going faster than that do not have any type of e-assist on them. And you can't tell the difference between a class 1 and a class 3. Both of them can go over 15 miles an hour. So I really would encourage we look at speed enforcement instead of, like, you can't tell the difference between my class 1 and my class 3 e-bikes. They look identical. In fact, my class 3 e-bike doesn't even look like an e-bike. So the idea that you're going to be able to readily identify through like some sort of visual, it's really speed that I think impacts safety. And then lastly, I'm very interested in parental accountability. I just had lunch today with a friend of mine who's a counselor in Commerce City, and they have a parental accountability ordinance that they passed this last spring that holds parents and minors responsible for violations of their city's ordinance for allowing their minors to operate these vehicles. So those are a couple of frameworks that are important to me. The pedestrian conflicts, it was mentioned at Dom's gathering at the Green. We don't have any particularly like designated high pedestrian traffic areas, except for maybe in front of schools during the school year, compared to like a downtown Golden or in Denver, where you have like a lot of these high, like heavily pedestrianized areas, Old Town Arvada. So I'm a little hesitant to get into that. I would support a dismount zone designation, whether it's for an event permit. So for an event at the Green, we could designate dismount through that area. But I think in general, we just don't have enough pedestrian conflict, and we don't have enough on-street bike facilities to encourage people to use instead of those. So those are a couple of thoughts that I have, and would like to go ahead and open the conversation back up to Councilor Martel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. You set up a lot of my questions very well. My head's going in a couple different directions, but to circle back on a couple, I really agree with the conversation around the bikes being marketed towards kids and kids riding that their brains aren't fully developed yet. They've not been in traffic. And how do we protect them? But also, we grew up with bikes on streets. We made traffic stop so that we could finish our games in the street before we got out of the way. It was a different era. But I think that one way that I would like to discuss or hear conversation on is around accountability or even liability to the guardian on ensuring that their children, I mean, these are not cheap bikes, so I'm assuming it's an adult getting a bike for a child. I know I'm making some presumptions, but that there is some accountability back to that guardian if they're handing over a bike and not handing over some lessons and some responsibility and some education. And along with that, I would say I would definitely be in favor of some age restrictions around helmets and the reflective gear and things that we can require under a certain age as a way of protecting minors, where I know that as adults we can encourage that. And I sure hope that adults don't ride at night without some kind of reflective gear, but they're adults, and we want to let them make that bad mistake if they want to. So that is an area that I really thought about going through this. Also in my community feedback in District 1, we've heard a lot of feedback on the speed of bicycles, and to Mayor Pro Tem Holtein's comments, it's not just e-bikes, it's bikes. And I am more of a car driver than a bike rider, but I'm very aware of the bikes around me. And there are times when I feel unsafe because bikes are flying by me, particularly on 32nd. So I think speed on our bikes is something that needs to be talked about. And I get a lot of feedback on the speed of bikes on our trails. So where we might not have big pedestrian gathering places, I think that the speed of bikes on our trails is something that definitely needs to be considered in this. I really like the idea of the dismount places, and maybe when there's activities in some of our big parks, that would be appropriate on some of our trails. The other thing that would like to make sure we address tonight at some point is if a vendor of e-bikes were to approach Wheat Ridge again about a partnership. I texted with Patrick Goff today about have we just not had any interest, or do we have any restrictions against having that type of a partnership, and we just haven't leaned into one yet. But I think they're coming. I think with advancement on 38th and Northwest Denver growing to the north and west, I think a service like that is probably not far for Wheat Ridge, and I would like to take this opportunity to be prepared for what we might want to include in that or around that topic as we talk about e-bikes. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to clarify, are you talking about a shared mobility service? Okay, okay, great, thank you. Counselor Rome.
Thank you, Member Tim. So I have two questions. One is, what is the current law for wearing helmets either for mopeds or motorcycles in relation to age?
So you're required, if you're under 18 and riding a motorcycle, you're required to have a helmet on. I think Mayor Pro Tem I think Mayor Pro Tem identified it earlier. It's challenging to identify if someone's 18 or not. Once you hit that wonderful 21, you can ride without a helmet in any way, shape, or form that you like. So, I'm sorry, once you hit 18, you can ride in any way you like, but below that, so when you get your license at 16, if you're riding your bikes and motorcycles, you are required to wear a helmet until 18.
Mopeds, I can't remember.
I don't know about the moped, but I do know the motorcycles. That's accurate.
Yeah,
for the
it's just,
motorcycle.
it's eye protection after 18, but
Right.
underneath that, it's a helmet.
And then what does the registration look like for, or how does it work for mopeds, say under 16? When do you need a license for a moped? And also what is the approximate range of speed for mopeds?
Used to be brake power, now it's
Well, so it depends on if it's gas powered or battery powered. If
Let's
it's-
say gas, just to make it,
It's
if
at
that
100
helps.
cc's, you're required to have a license for.
Okay, but not like 50?
Yep, for the smaller ones, but they do have to be registered though.
They have to be registered. Okay.
you have to be insured,
Yeah. Right.
as well. So there's restrictions on those vehicles beyond what we're discussing right now.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Counselor Quinn.
Can I add something really quick?
Uh,
Can I add something
Yeah,
really quick?
is it related?
It's related to
Yep, go ahead.
Councilmember The Google says that moped helmets are required through 17 as well in the state of Colorado.
Thank you, Counselor Martell on Google.
And Google.
Yep, all right, Counselor Quinn.
Well, thanks for bringing this up. I know we've all kind of spoke about this, and so being the curmudgeon that I'm going to be on this, it appears to me that the delineation is if it's pedal powered or not. And now looking through like Arvadas and Goldens and Lakewood's rules just in a quickie search here, I'm all for kind of making sure that we're aligned with our neighbors. So people riding from Golden through Wheat Ridge, going into Arvada, we don't have any weird issues. But the issues I always see are the younger kids on bikes that do not have pedals. And I think that's the bigger issue. The ones watched one Friday doing a wheelie across Kipling on 38th, two of them. Earlier, saw a little kid, he couldn't have been 8 years old, riding all the way down 38th, going into the gas station. So I kind of think that that's a delineation perhaps that we need to look at. The weirdo one-wheeled things, I think they're covered in, it's Arvadas or Golden under unique. I think they call them unique mobility devices or something like that. But I get that they're marketing to those kids, and I don't think we're going to stop that. But I think if they're not pedal powered, that's kind of where we have to we really need to drill down and find out if the, licensing, at least register like the 50cc and like the scooters or the little mini bikes that are gas powered. Maybe those got to be registered too. And then, of course, the age, like we were all talking about, 16 and older. I don't know. The regular pedal powered bikes, I've never had an issue with anybody riding one of those anywhere, that either on the trail or wherever we're at. It's the ones they're not pedaling, they're using as a motorcycle. Sorry, the redneck's coming out. A motorcycle. And they're motorized vehicles is what they are. They're motorized vehicles that are not, that's just what it is, plain and simple. So maybe that's a delineation we need to talk about, is if they're motorized, completely motorized or not. I don't know, just a couple of thoughts, being the curmudgeon today.
I have a clarifying question, and then we'll go to Councilor Wood. Are we we're using e-mobility here, so if something's gas powered, is it fall outside of what we're talking about here?
I would think that,
Okay.
I would think that it would.
Okay, I'm assuming that, but I think we should be explicit on it because a lot of these devices do come with different motor types. All right, Councilor Wood.
I'll just be honest, I've had a little trouble formulating questions because some of it actually is really complicated in a lot of ways to me. When I looked at the example of City and County of Denver, their rules address speed limits generally 15 miles an hour. The first question that came to mind for me is this: someone out on the street, a policeman on the street, seeing someone or registering them with radar that they've gone over 15 miles an hour, or is it the capability of the machine that they're driving? And, or is it both somehow? And Chief Murtha partially answered that question for me, at least in talking about how there's different criteria that can be grouped together so that you don't have 10 different things you're trying to regulate, but still it seems complicated. So, I have a couple of things that I've come to agree with listening to other counselors talk, in particular the parental responsibility. I think that really is key when it comes down to it, because these are young folks and they need to rely on their parents to make sure they're doing the right thing and that they're safe, because it isn't even just their safety, it's other safety as well. And also in the report that you guys did, which is excellent, just talking about the different types of conflicts with the different types of devices. Again, I think it's complicated. So then I'll just wind up to where I really wanted to go, and that's enforceability, because it's almost like you have to be out there and have eyes on people on these mobility devices and e-bikes in order to be able to do something. And I there's so many combinations and permutations, it seems difficult. So I don't know what you guys would think about that, but I'd like to hear.
So myself and DC Kellogg had a long conversation today, after many other long conversations, about enforceability, which is quite honestly difficult in this situation. Generally speaking, I believe that these devices are flagged for their speed, not for what they're rated at necessarily, but if it's posted speed of 15 miles an hour, you could be on a class whatever, but as long as you're under that speed, that would be probably acceptable in most jurisdictions. There are some that restrict the types of vehicles that can be in certain areas, and they've also, in some areas, as I said earlier, required that you have identification of what e-bike classification you are riding. So, but for an officer to go and figure it out can be difficult. When we talk about parental responsibility, that is also complicated. To properly execute in court, for an officer, they're going to have to prove that the parents knew about it, or they authorized it, or they purchased it. There's a lot of work that goes into that. So much like curfews and other violations, they certainly have a deterrent factor, but the actual follow through from police is difficult, can be difficult. There's a lot of reasons for that I won't go into, but I'm just saying that enforceability can be a challenge, but the first step to anything that council wants is to get the rules in place, and then it's up to us to figure out how we can do our best to enforce it. We discussed a lot of the educational components, which really is where our bread and butter would be, to go out in the community, to really talk through this with parents, to go find people where they're at, to talk to businesses, as DC Kellogg talked about earlier. So it would be the education part of it, trying to get the community on board and making sure that everybody was aware, the first step, and then going after those people that would be violating those speeds. And I think the ones that were obvious is the easiest place to start. When you talk about crowded areas, sometimes when we talk about traffic, speed is actually self-controlling in areas where there's congestion. But if you're on, let's say that if you're down by the creek and you're on a trail there and it looks wide open, that's where people tend to fly, and they really open up the speed on those. So a collision in those areas can be often that, you know, if you have a collision in those areas, somebody's probably flying. If you have a collision in a congested area, they might not be. They might be, but they more than likely are. So those are factors to try and consider when we're talking about these things. Not that you know, the congestion should rule out the fact that somebody can't go fast there. It's just that it's not immune to people to get hit. And you know, I was always worried about people walking their dog or whatever that could dart from left to right while a bike is coming up at speed. Now that could be a regular, you know, pedestrian pedaled bike, or it could be an e-bike. So those are things to consider. And we would use radar devices. We could also pace them. We also have our own e-bikes to go out there and be able to ride up behind and see if somebody's violating. So there are different methods, but that's our end of it, to figure out enforcement. We're just looking for direction on what you want.
Counselor Okada and then Counselor Larson.
Thank you. My question's regarding the, are there existing rules? So like for non-motorized bicycles, my dad being a instructor trainer for IPIMBA taught me very young, bicyclists belong on the road. They do not belong on the sidewalk. And so from a very young age, I was riding my bicycle in the road. And I imagine that we don't have any rules that would prohibit a certain age from being in the road, because it seems to me like we pass from one state of a situation to a new state of a situation if that minor is now using the lanes as a vehicle does. And that has been most of my anecdotal experience with this issue is 2 kids well under the age of 12 using a turn lane, trying to squeak in while another car has to slam on their brakes. Those kinds of things are the kind of things that stick out the most in my mind when I'm experiencing this in our community. Weird and kind of tricky question, but right now, the current state of things in a world that made rules that didn't imagine electric motorized bicycles, that's entirely allowed as it stands right now. Is that correct? Okay. That helps me understand there. The other thing that I wanted to, That's it for me.
Thank you, Counselor Larson.
In my research, and Mr. Dahl step in here, but in my research, they don't specifically identify the e-motos, and I think there is and I think that's kind of the loophole in this moment, and that's why I think we're seeing communities, municipalities having to find a way to plug those holes, for lack of a better term. Right. Well, I've been in touch with Division Deputy Chief Reeves in Arvada, and he is our liaison with our lobbyists, with the legislators. And there is conversation about this. There is a recognition by the state that we need to be looking at this. But he and I chatted about this last week as I was preparing for this, and he says there's no conversation at this moment for the state to actually regulate that any further than it has.
There are municipalities, though, if you look through, if you try and research some of the various legislative initiatives that say if you go into that space, then you're required to have a license. So they've taken that up at a local level to say if you're going to operate at those speeds, then you need to have a license.
A driver's license, though. The vehicle itself is not registered.
Right. It would be a driver's license, and they do, I think, in some cases require insurance, is what I read in some of these, so.
Well, yeah, and that might be a place to start. If there's nothing that, from the state of Colorado that generally says I have a motorcycle, but it's a motorcycle driven by 1,200 cc's of gasoline piston power. And I wear a helmet because it's just something you have to do. But I also have a motorcycle endorsement on my driver's license, and I pay Jefferson County a registration fee every year. So if we're talking about registering e-motos, I would think we'd sort of put them in the bucket that says it's a motorcycle. And even though it doesn't have a gasoline-powered motor, it is still a motorcycle, and that means it has to have all those insurance and a registered driver, or a licensed driver and a registered vehicle. And whether this is something we wait for the state of Colorado to say, oh, we're going to go ahead and do this because we already have rules in the state statutes to say this is a motorcycle and this is what a motorcycle means.
One of the problems with the registration, though, is that's generally handled through the state, so we would have to do something internally, which would be a far cry. But requiring the license and the insurance is not, we just tell people to do that. So there's 2 out of the 3 that would be easy to accomplish. The third one is something that Colorado doesn't do, so that would be an administrative task.
Do the insurance companies generally offer coverage for e-motos?
I would have to look into that. I don't know. I would assume through some form of whether it's an umbrella policy or or homeowners insurance, actually, in some cases covers bike accidents and those types of things.
That would make sense.
I would assume that in some place, we would be able to find some kind of an insurance policy that is pretty typical.
Okay, so that would, it's not out of the realm of realistic sort of possibilities for the city to say, if you're going to operate one of these things, you may not need to have a license, a vehicle tag, but you would need an operator's license. And would the operator's license have a motorcycle endorsement?
Well, what you're talking about is kind of inventing a whole new system that the city would, I mean.
And that's the
trying to answer
problem,
your
isn't it?
question,
Yeah.
You know, so if you invent a local city licensing and registration system, then Wheat Ridge is its own little MVD for,
Right.
I mean, honestly, I mean, that's what would be involved in implementing that suggestion. And once you do that, then yes, you promulgate the regulations as an MVD and you write your own ticket effectively. But you'd need to be able to have the infrastructure and the staff to operate that system, and hopefully have lines that weren't as long as MVD.
Well, that'd be fun.
See, a little humor,
Yeah.
The places that have done it, though, have not required a motorcycle endorsement, just that you're a licensed driver through the state. So
you have a,
You have a license, so you know the rules of the road. It doesn't demonstrate that you can ride a motorcycle like motorcycle endorsement does, but it demonstrates that you have the ability to get a license and recognize road signs and turning directions and signals. So I think that's where they said, we're not going to become a licensing entity, but, you know, having a license gives us a level of comfort. It may not be the ultimate, but it is a level of comfort. So you have to have a state-issued license to operate one of those, so.
yeah, and that does make sense. Regarding the pathways along Clear Creek and enforcement, I'm thinking horses.
That would sound, yeah. And we actually have some folks that are part of Jefferson County's horse patrol, so. there
Why
you go.
not? You know?
Be a lot of fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be a whole new, well, okay. The other issue for me gets into the commercial side, and we have the Lime scooters that you see disposed of all over the place. This, you don't need you don't need an age requirement, you don't need a license. Anybody, I guess down to like, what, toddlers can operate one of those things?
I think you need to have a credit card, if I remember correctly.
You need, well, yeah, you get mom and dad's, but, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose.
So I'd want to make sure that as we approach this thing, that the commercial side of it, because I know that there are businesses that their delivery people use one of these classes of bikes. And it's just, we wouldn't want to create something that sort of discourages them from using e-bikes for things like delivery, because it makes a lot of sense. Instead of having somebody operate a car, just if they're only going half a mile to make a delivery using the e-bike, just makes a lot of sense. I did find out that the one wheels and electric unicycles, one wheel is actually a trademark. So we'll be careful when we go ahead and describe it. But they are, I think they fit within this, what we're talking about in terms of mobility devices, that I think our definition should include the electric skateboards, longboards, one wheels and electric unicycles. And I've actually seen gasoline-powered skateboards. They exist. You don't see them that often, but I have seen them. They're gasoline-powered, so I'm concerned that when we write definitions, that we include somehow anything that can move under its own power, whether it's gasoline-powered or coal or diesel. And the idea of the helmets under 18, yeah, I mean, that just seems like a way to save a no-brainer, I guess. But helmets just, I can't believe that the state allows people to drive motorcycles without helmets, but that's just me. That's all I have right now. Thanks.
All right, I'm calling on myself and then Counselor Ohm, then Counselor Quinn. As Counselor Larson was talking, I want to be mindful. I mean, this is such a gray, muckety thing, right? Thank God for the clear definitions of the 3 classes of e-bikes. Everything else is like such a gray zone, it seems like to me. But I'm hearing and I'm inclined to agree with this, like, pretty crisp. We've got e-bikes and everything else is an e-moto and requires a license. However, low-speed conveyances that a lot of middle schoolers and high schoolers are using, like upright scooters, I think are pretty valid. A lot of them actually don't go that fast. So I'd like us to make sure we've got a carve out for a low-speed conveyance, and maybe we maximize that at like 15 miles an hour, like our speed limit on the trail, that a personally operated low speed conveyance is okay. I mean, I think this is where we get in the weird part, but I think we would have a lot of really outraged kids and families if we were to say you couldn't use your upright scooter, and a lot of them just aren't that fast. There are ones that would then trigger some of our other restrictions that I think we could be enforcing that. But I'd like us to consider that. I feel really strongly that middle schoolers don't have enough independent mobility in the community. And you can easily get from Everett to other places like Discovery Park, like on a low-speed conveyance safely. So encouraging constructive getting around in our community. I have some wrap-up thoughts that I think are starting to come together here, but I want to hear from Councilor Ohm and Councilor Quinn, and then I'll start seeking a consensus on some of the questions here. Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I was just thinking about the conversations, and these are some good conversations to have, and I know it's a lot of gray. I know that, as we consider these types of policies, this year, I mean, I follow what's going on with the e-moto. There's already been a teenager, a 14-year-old that died in Washington State on an e-moto. And my biggest things that I've seen, it's not the e-bikes, it's the e-motos. I've been on the Clear Creek Trail on my 30-pound bike, and someone's going excessive of 30 miles an hour on the dirt trail in the Clear Creek, and then just pop up in front of me. Surprise. And these are heavy bikes, hundreds of pounds, they're very, very fast. They're not wearing a helmet. I can clearly see the individual is not even a high schooler. It's probably somebody in middle school. And eventually, and the other thing I'm thinking too is like the individual is going along, Wadsworth, the same kind of circumstance, if they're going with traffic, and let's say there's some type of, injury, well, state doesn't require insurance, so they probably don't have insurance. And I'm sure that's the conversation that probably a lot of parents have, is like, what do you want? I want this e-moto bike. And they're like, great, here you go. And they send them on their way, not thinking anything about it. And that's concerning. I think if I was on any type of bike lane and I have a e-moto bike going 30 plus miles in the opposite direction at me, I'm not going to win. That's going to be really bad. And yes, that's part of it, is education. And so I do think that down the road, we have to move forward with something, and it may not be tonight, but I'm concerned that eventually one of these meetings, we're going to have some parents that are going to come in, they're going to say, my kid died. What did you do, council, or not do? And so we're going to have to keep continuing having these conversations. My expectation is that we're not going to be able to solve all these issues right now, but I think there's some good valid points of registration. I kind of agree a little bit with Councilmember Larson. Maybe it's county, but we have to have those conversations with the state and say, let's not wait until there's a lot of deaths and a lot of injuries. We got to start. This is happening. This is not happening. This isn't a Wheat Ridge problem. This isn't a Colorado problem. This is happening across the United States. And we need everybody to start coming to the table and having these conversations, especially with the e-motos. I generally don't. I see people in my neighborhood that are on the single wheel. I see people on the unicycle. Generally, those, even a person on the electric skateboard, they might be going fast. That doesn't worries me as much. Usually, those are adults. But the e-motos, those scare me. They're going really fast. They accelerate really fast. One night as I came to council several months ago, there was 3 maybe high schoolers in black hoodies on black bikes, no helmets, going right down Wadsworth. And I thought, this is probably not a great outcome. No lights, nothing, just reckless. And somehow we need to find something that at least, if we can't, that says like, this is our, low hanging fruit of regulations. And start from there, and then having some harder conversations. But that's my concern. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Quinn.
Thanks, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. And maybe this kind of blends into what you're trying to do for consensus, or at least wrangle this. Goldens, because I think it's important to be not necessarily the same, but go along the same path as our neighbors. they call out e-motos as any vehicle with a motor over 750 watts, and they call it is not a legal e-bike. Now, I don't know, I'm not a bicyclist, so I don't know if that helps us copycatting that language. And then maybe we create some language of that mid-span at 4,000 to, what'd you say, Scott, earlier? To, yes, from 750 to 4,700 is something that needs to be registered at minimum and have lights or something on it for at night if they're going to wear it. And then over 4,000, it's a car, in my book, or a motorcycle. Arvada has something on the shared micro-mobility. Maybe we can copycat what they have to kind of try to wrangle in what Kathleen was talking about. And the third thing I was I called it the weird things, the one wheels and stuff. Maybe is that a 750 or less? I agree that they're usually adults. One of my neighbors has one and he rides it up and down and it scares. I don't know how you have balance and ride that thing. It's, beyond me, but he does it really well. And so I agree. I don't know if those are as big of a deal or not, but if we want to talk about it and find out what the correct wattage on that you have to kind of be careful with and where you can ride them. Also, Golden's has where you can ride things like the e-motos. They're not allowed on sidewalks, trails, parks, or in the creek corridors. So maybe that's a good place to start, Madam.
Thank you. That was a great overview of our neighboring jurisdictions. As the vice chair of JEFTAG, we are looking at a county-wide e-mobility model policy to hopefully provide for unincorporated Jefferson County, but then provide some guidelines for maybe future updates that would bring the region into more compliance. So anything else that feels important for discussion? Otherwise, I feel like there's some consensus coming together. Councilor Okada.
Just a quick clarifier, electric scooters that go over 20 miles an hour by the state definitions would fall outside of these definitions of what class 1, 2, and 3 would be, and therefore would be not allowed. Is that right? Okay. Like, would be not legal in the state of Colorado. A scooter, because ostensibly it would be of the only classes that would not require pedal assistance. Therefore, it would be limited at 20 miles an hour.
Oh, I understand. Yes, yes.
Okay, gotcha. Just making sure I understand. Because at my day job in Denver, I see quite a few electric scooters going well above that in that area. But just want to make sure that we have that covered. It sounds like the state does already.
Yeah. I guess what I would offer is I'm sure, and maybe Mayor Pro Tem can offer further on this, but I believe there's governors on there, and so some people may hamper with, but for the most part, I don't think. Some people, for the most part, I think, I don't think they make any that go over 20, as far as I could find.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for this discussion. And I think there's some consensus coming together around this framework. And just a reminder that as we put it into motion, as we move it forward, adopt it, and learn more about it, that this council can always pick it up again to see if there's, gaps, if there's data that's indicating things that are not being addressed. I do want to speak to Council Member Martell's comment about future shared mobility licensing. It could be coming to the city. I think once it does, it comes back here specifically, because it's a much bigger. You have to look at like sidewalk policies and like it's a whole nother bucket of bees, to mix all my metaphors tonight. So I think it's important to recognize that would change probably the overall e-mobility landscape in the city. But should that license request and decision move forward, come to council at that time, you could look at how that would impact whatever framework we're moving forward with today. So that's been my professional experience. So
Mayor Pro Tem, if I might, I would suggest that we follow the recommendation from staff and there are 5 items that are under consideration.
Sorry,
Definitions.
that's what I was working on.
Well, I just want, so we're clear on what it is we're going to be consenting.
Right, yeah, sorry, I was just providing, yep, thank you. I was working towards that. So there are 5 specific questions that have some sub-questions. I have a proposed consensus that addresses these questions based on the discussion here. So I'm going to read the consensus and then we can go through each one of them individually. In part because some of the discussions here have sort of bunched, and I don't think these questions stand alone discreetly based off of the discussion. So what I'm hearing tonight is that there is support to adopt the state definition of e-bikes, and everything outside of that is an e-moto up to the 4,500. Is that right, Councilor Ohm? I think.
Well, if I may, you had delineations of nothing up to 750.
So state definition, which includes the 3 different classes up to 750, sorry. My glasses can either look at all of you or at my screen, sorry, up to 750. And then over that is an e-moto up to the motorcycle definition per the state. And we are including in that low-speed personal conveyance, the weirdos, the unique mobility devices. And I think those limit at 20 miles per hour because those would be consistent with like a class 2 e-bike. So we want to get those definitions clear so that those definitions then can be used for enforcement. I heard a consensus for requiring a license for anything that isn't defined as an e-bike or as that personal conveyance device that we're tucking in the e-bike definition. I also heard registration, but that would be something with the county and probably something we'd have to work towards. So should that option be something that the county works on, then we could bring it back here. But for now, just requiring a standard driver's license for operation of e-motos. It's already required for motorcycles. Requiring a helmet for 18 and under riders of anything. Requiring a license, so we talked about, sorry.
So real quick,
Yep.
18 and under or under 18?
Under 18, sorry, I have U18. Yep, U18. Under 18. We talked about holding parents and guardians accountable. I know that was flagged as being difficult to enforce, but I think is good for deterrence for our outreach and communication. And then I have here requiring a license for anything class 2 and 3 or e-motos. So that is for, class 3. So that would be requiring a driver's license for a class 3 e-bike rider or an e-moto rider. And I'm seeing questions.
So here's a concern out of left field. If we go like a class 3 bike with pedals, I'm thinking about somebody that's lost their license through whatever. Are we, by saying you got to have a license for those, are we keeping those folks from getting a job somewhere, you know, riding their bike somewhere or whatever, even though it's a class 3, but you know, I'm afraid if you, on a bicycle, if we say you got to have a driver's license, I'm wondering if we're hurting those folks.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do we want to distinguish just age? You have to be 16 or older in order to operate a class 3 or e-motor?
I'm with that, or an e-moto. I think that's good.
That would be a enforceability issue just because 16-year-olds don't always get their license. And so you'd be relying on sort of their word of honor, if you will. So there would be enforceability issues there. What I liked about the 1 and 2 was everything is 20 miles an hour before you need a license, but I understand Councilman Quinn's point there. It's just would be difficult if we're going to put an age limit on it that doesn't require a license, then our office is going to be spending time trying to figure out, are you 16 or 17 or how old are you? And that could take a few more minutes, but it'll depend on how much enforcement we have. Just food for thought.
How about the E-moto delineation that you got to have the license for? Does that create the same problem?
No, I mean, if it's an E-moto, you got to have a license, so you've got to provide something. If you don't provide it, it's the assumption is you don't have it. So you can figure that out in court. But in order to do it the other way around is to tell somebody who's telling you that they're 18, who's 15, we're going to write you a ticket anyway because we don't believe you, but if we don't have enough to substantiate or not. So it just gets a little bit backwards on how we enforce it, but it's easier for an officer, especially since this is not going to be their only job, to just have one standard out there and say, listen, if you see somebody who's driving faster than 20 miles an hour, you got to have a license. And then we'll be able to do the kind of enforcement I think we're talking about here. If we say, okay, in this circumstance, in A, you go to, this discipline, in B, you go to this discipline, in C, you got to go to this one, we're going to lose a lot of our officers. And, I get enough with traffic and cars and mufflers and blah, blah, blah. Now you're telling me you got to know e-bikes and every different speed and every different, I try and keep it easier so that they can do the enforcement. They're smart folks, but there's a lot to know out there. That's my only.
Councillor Wood.
So I guess I have a question based on that. One thing that I think, unless I missed it, and tell me if I did, one of the things mentioned in the recommendations was restrict the use of high-speed devices on multi-use trails, which I think is a real safety conflict. But perhaps what Chief Murtha just shared with us, that's the way that's addressed, is by having a speed cap regardless of the vehicle type. Is that right?
Yeah, and we'll get to that. I think right now we're really focused on how do we manage age restrictions? And so what we're hearing as a proposed is if you're going over 20 miles an hour, you need to have a license, correct? And that would allow people, a class 1 e-bike is going to get you to your job a little slower than a class 3, but it'll still substitute for a vehicle. So, Councilor Martell.
Can you repeat the second recommendation you said to the last one? Because they seem to overlap in my head and I want to make sure I'm understanding both of them.
Yep. And then I'll go through the whole list. So we've got the whole package and then we can revisit. So adopt the state definition of an e-bike. And that would include classes 1, 2, and 3 and up to 750. And then over 750 up to 4,500, which is the state's motorcycle definition, would be considered an e-moto. Under the definition, we're using a low-speed conveyance, personal conveyance, such as a scooter, as long as it's going 20 miles an hour or under, would fit in that definition. So that would create the clarity of definition for enforcement. Require a license. I think what we're saying here, require a license for anything that can travel over 20 miles per hour. So that would include class 3 e-bikes and e-motos and above. Then require a helmet for under 18. Parental and / guardian accountability. And then we talked about for regulation of where they can be ridden. We've talked about establishing a no ride zone for events. And then we talked about using speed enforcement for our multi-use trails, which currently has a speed limit capped at 15 miles an hour. So the speed and limit enforcement would be for all types of users, not just motorized users that are allowed to be there. So those are the proposals I'm hearing coming out of this discussion. If there's any need for clarification or further discussion, or if anything needs to be added on, Councilor Martell.
Thank you. I want to make sure that if there's an ADA compliant tool, machine, that we're including them in like the safety restrictions, but not excluding them from any place they might need to be. So if somebody is in a wheelchair on a trail, they are subject to the 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, or do they not really fall into this because they're not a pedal powered machine, they're wheelchair?
I think 15 miles is for everybody. Your horse, your,
Okay.
yeah.
So they would be subject to like the safety limits, but not held to a different standard.
Yeah, if it's winter and you've got your dog sled, no more than 15 miles an hour. Counselor Snell.
I wanted to go back to the holding guardians accountable for allowing minors to operate the non-compliant e-bikes. I'm all for that. How does that look for enforcement?
It would be challenging, but I think it's a good tool personally. I think, saying to parents, hey, you're possibly on the hook for this. Even if we don't do a lot of enforcement around it, I think it sends the right message that that's a force multiplier is really what it boils down to put the parents on the spot, to be able to go to a meeting or send an officer out to a meeting at school and say, listen, if your kids are riding it, it's possible we'll knock on your door and hold you accountable. So I agree with that.
Counselor Okada.
One area, and apologies if I missed it, but it sounds like it might be missing from the consensus that you outlined, Mayor Pro Tem, is the possibility of strengthening rules requiring all riders to yield to pedestrians. I know we didn't discuss that much on the front end of that, but that is something that I want us to consider.
Great, thank you for calling that. What do we currently have around requiring riders to yield to pedestrians? I know on our trails, it's one of the rules that's there. Where else could that be strengthened other than prohibiting or allowing?
Yeah, I think we get into some, I'll let you talk on it, Eric, but we get into some stuff when we're on the road, whether it's about pedestrians, about lane filtering, about, what do you, how do you behave on the roads? And I think to the earlier point, in my opinion, this is my opinion, that we have a responsibility to make sure that there are rules that provide safety to the folks on both ends of it. If you swerve to avoid an e-bike, and you strike a person or whatever, that's going to come back to the question of what was the rule around that person being in the roadway. Also to pedestrians, you might come across them, in the roadway, but it's always pedestrian first. Any type of mechanical device, which is, a bike or above, would have to yield to that, and then cars yield to bikes and beyond. So that's kind of the order of operations for enforcement, if you will. So I think it's pretty well delineated. It's just, there will be those outlying questions that will evolve over time, but I think, getting a standard in place and then evolving in this is maybe the way this has to work.
I think I understand that, and let me repeat it back to you just to make sure. The usefulness of those kinds of rules aren't for every single moment of yield question marks that happened, but more so when something was wrong, identifying, did it go wrong because this person was in a place that they weren't doing that, or was the hierarchy broken in this particular way, in which case that rule becomes an enforceability moment, as opposed to just in general. Because I think the concern that we hear from constituents is, it was a pleasant walk on Clear Creek until the pack of 12 bicyclists went screaming by at a very high speed. That I think is the concern that happens there. But I see how that's difficult to enforce. I mean, without speed enforcement might be enough in that space.
Yeah, so if I'm answering the question you're asking, it's about yielding, but that wouldn't be necessarily a yield situation. It's a passing situation.
Yeah.
So yielding would be certainly at a time where there could be conflict, then the bike has to yield. But if they feel like it's safe to pass on the green belt or something, then they would have a right to do that. But again, when it comes back to a question of liability, you ran over my kid at 20 miles an hour, you didn't yield to them. It's like everything else, to safely pass. And so there is a responsibility there to operate safely in those spaces. So when the bad thing happens, then it really hits home. Until then, they kind of have a right to pass. So.
Yeah, thank you. That helps me.
Great. Thank you for that reminder, Counselor Larson.
One last thing, Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. There are the 5 items on here. Were you going to talk about item number 5?
Yes, we are.
I guess my question is, what is described here is, should Wheat Ridge collaborate with Jefferson County bicycle advocacy organizations, community partners to educate the community? I would suggest it would probably go beyond educating the community in terms of signage, maybe better striping, maybe a little more persistent message delivery instead of just an education program and we're done. I use the trail in Golden all the time, and they've done a pretty good job with signs up there, who yields to who, what the speed limits are, be courteous, all the sorts of things, the rules of the road sort of thing, presented as you walk or drive by. So something physical out along the trails that reminds people that, just be courteous.
Could not agree more. Counselor Ohm passed around a great sign from Golden this week in which they're saying what the rules are and also clearly stating that they are enforcing them. So I think the enforcement piece also comes with this, but I think what we're doing tonight is giving instruction and guidance on how to develop the regulatory and ordinance to come back to us. And then once that gets passed, it gets passed with a blessing to go out, do the education, figure out the enforcement, and then collect the data and bring it back to us so that we can know, what's working, where things that are not being addressed. So yes, education and enforcement are what are going to make this work at the end of the day. So anything else, or are we good here? I feel good. All right, sounds good. From e-bikes to drones, like all of the,
Consensus on all that.
wait, I'm sorry. I don't do this often. It's certainly a little. Do we have consensus to move forward? And I can read them again if you would like me to. Or are we good on the list that I read? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. All right, now we got to talk about drones. Well, look, we've got our drone team here. I would like to go ahead and hand it off to Chief Murtha and Eric, Division Chief Kellogg, to talk about regulation of drones.
Yeah, so drones are in a similar space as a burgeoning new technology, generally speaking, but there are impactful regulations where there can be. However, as Chief Kellogg will go through his presentation, Federal Aviation Administration hasn't really yielded any of its authority over drones. So it's very limited in what you'll see in some of the other jurisdictions and the regulations that they've provided. Generally, it's about where you can land, about harassment and privacy issues, but it's controlled by the FAA. So we have to be very cautious of how we proceed with those regulations. We've seen them shot down in places that overstep their bounds, if you will, to say you can't fly in this area. They have given some space, the FAA has given some space to make regulations around certain things like large public gatherings, but there's not a lot of space in there is how I'll open this up, and Chief Kellogg will sort of inform you on those things.
So I just got another brief presentation, and we chatted just a little bit, and after the presentation, I'll turn it over to Mr. Dahl to outline. So, sorry. I know. I was so disappointed in myself. But drones are something that's really an up-and-coming technology from both, and it's also, I don't think, some of our drone operators also own their own and enjoy doing that. So it's an up-and-coming experience. It's not just up-and-coming hobby, but it's also an up-and-coming industry technology that has been remarkably beneficial for us. I don't know if you see many of the reports, but we use our drones often to Chicago just recently, several that broke into houses. So we found remarkable benefits from use of drone programs. Now, some of the issues, however, for lack of a better term, is that drone use, and as I've noticed, is increasing across commercial, recreational. Apologies. Start over. That's good, because I'm kind of reiterating. Some of the issues, though, and as I noted earlier, drone use is increasing across commercial, recreational, and public safety fields. And we're seeing a remarkable upswing throughout the Denver metro area in all of those areas. The city predominantly, and in this moment, relies solely on the FAA rules, which I'll outline for you here momentarily. And then a local ordinance, I think, may be needed to assist in governing the uses of those drones a little bit further so that we can honor our community's culture and the way that we do business. The concerns that were prevalent, and for those of you who were here with the previous council, one of our own council members was experiencing some remarkable challenges as it related to some, I believe it was a person making a movie or something, but buzzing her animals and creating quite a bit of anxiety. And so, and then she also noted some privacy issues. It was flying right to her window, just general nuisance behaviors, wildlife impact, and of course, some of the public safety issues. If you're not it's actually not as easy as you would expect. And so if you're not a gifted, talented drone pilot, you can actually hurt somebody with these things. So I think it's an important aspect to consider as well. And so we're here tonight just gathering and seeking direction on an ordinance development. And again, I'll turn this over to Mr. Dahl. He's got quite a bit as it relates to this. But the background here is our drone use is expanding due to the affordability. You can get a drone for about $50 now, which is kind of an interesting. They've gone from, the same exact drone 2 years ago at $350 to I looked the other day, $55. Wheat Ridge launched its own drone program in March of 2024, and as I noted earlier, we've seen remarkable benefits from it. Just most recently, I haven't got all the numbers collated, but we utilized our drones to actually answer several calls for service as it related to fireworks on the 4th of July, and we saw a dramatic benefit from them. And we've used the drones the last 2 years to answer calls. What I can offer is in 2025, we answered 119 calls for service. So providing, I think, a much better response time to our community and their difficulties with some of the illegal fireworks that are being fired and utilized. Personal and commercial drone presence is increasing in neighborhoods and parks. As I said, we're seeing quite a bit of drone usage. Just on this past Saturday, we had 4 drones in Anderson Park all flying at the same time, which apparently was interesting. But the concern is always everybody else's safety and whatnot. So they're growing. Drones are used for photography, videography, marketing, public safety, and inspections. I was in Wyoming last weekend, and they're actually using the drones to do cattle counts, which I thought was pretty interesting. Pardon me. And they're also using them, so there's a large-scale oil industry up there, a remarkably huge industry. I didn't realize how big it was, but they're using the drones to inspect their derricks as well, which I thought was pretty interesting. So we're using it for any number of different things, inspections and whatnot. I have friends still in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they have some high-rises there that they'll send drones up to actually inspect the windows and the outsides of those buildings that are 27, 30 floors high, which I would not have even thought of that, but what a great business. But it is something that we have to be conscious of as we move forward. as I noted, the FAA rules, they require a registration, they require a visual line of sight, they require an altitude under 400 feet. Obviously, you have to avoid airports, military bases, emergency scenes, and certain crowds. So 2 weeks ago, as it related to the Carnation Festival, you can't just fly a drone over the crowd at the Carnation Festival or a parade or something like that. And everybody who is working as a commercial drone pilot has to have a Part 107 certification, which requires a fairly extensive training process, and then the test is rather challenging. I think John or Sergeant Bowman offered that I think only just about 80% of people pass that test the first time around. So it's a challenging test, it sounds like. I'm very proud to say that every single one of our drone operators passed it on the first time around. So, local jurisdictions in our neck of the woods here have started down the path of restricting takeoff and landing areas to parks and very specific areas and open spaces, and cities. And I included that in the memo, the various permitting requirements and whatnot, and how cities are handling this. But there's permitting systems for filming and commercial drone operations that have been implemented as well. Again, I spoke with DC Reeves on this last week, and he says that their permitting system has actually functioned quite well for this. They're having people fly the western part of Arvada for wildfire issues, and the permitting was going quite well and was something that was quite beneficial. Pardon me. The community impact, however, is there's privacy concerns, as a former council member noted. You know, there was a drone sitting, I don't know what it was something to the effect of 8 feet off the ground, 2 feet outside of her bedroom window for 15 minutes or something to that effect. So the noise and the nuisance impacts for residents and wildlife, but also the domestic animal issues. This council member also had chickens and goats and some other things, and she noted a dramatic reduction in production. So egg production was reduced, some of the goat's milk was reduced, and some other things. So there's, you know, it does impact those domestic animals as well. Safety hazards over events, roads, emergency scenes, and then potential misuse for voyeurism or abusive behaviors, as I noted earlier. We don't know why it was sitting outside of her window, but it was there for 15 minutes, and it was very unnerving to her. So the options, and I just listed these, but there's certainly a ton of others that we could discuss and go through. But restrict, and these come from the other, I think I put 12 different ordinances in here, but you can restrict drone takeoff and landings on city-owned properties. You can ban drone surveillance violating certain privacy laws. We can actually set our own regulations as it relates to the privacy laws. Apply noise and nuisance rules to drone activity, restrict commercial drone use through zoning. Arvada is doing that. They're zoning certain areas for certain commercial types of use for the drones and whatnot. I should have asked, that was not a question, and I didn't ask the right question of the drone operators that I was talking to last week in Wyoming, but it's one that I think I could get additional information if you need. Regulate drones over events and large gatherings, as I noted, the Carnation Festival here recently would be something like that. Require police notification for high-risk operations. And so I looked into what are we talking about in terms of high-risk operations. Well, some of those operations, like flying around an oil rig, flying around cattle, those types of things, it's kind of a subjective measure as it relates to high risk. But it depends on who you're talking to, what the high risk is, but we can certainly regulate those, establish fines and penalties, and as I noted earlier, we can establish permitting systems for filming or other types of special operations, and then emergency restrictions allowed during critical incidents. Excuse me. I open the floor to questions, but most importantly, I think I'd turn it over to Mr. Dahl to discuss this a little bit further.
Thanks. Let me say this, council saw this twice already at study session in May and November of last year. And we saw this material, and I'm very pleased that you've seen it here again because there are new council members. And we wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page, understanding that there was sort of an unequal level of information based upon whether you were on council last year or not. And so now you have that same level of information. I'll tell you what council did with that as late as November of last year was the last time that council gave direction, but you did, or at least council, the then sitting council did. I think that was before, we were talking earlier, before the election. For whatever reason, the timing was such, just before. In any event, there's a memo, I don't have a PowerPoint, but there's a memo in your packet that's just a very short memo from me and an ordinance. Because coming out of that the second of two study sessions, my notes are that the guidance from the council was be conservative and risk averse in identifying the elements of an ordinance here locally. And that's what I did. And I'll mention that for you in a minute. You've already heard about the FAA and what they're doing and really the overarching federal authority. The state hasn't done much. As I've said in the memo, it's made it unlawful to track or harass wildlife, but there's not a lot going on and no drone use in state parks unless permission's granted. It's still a matter of local concern, at least below 400 feet, and in certain ways, we're not completely out of the business, which is why the council, I think, directed us to prepare an ordinance around a couple of topics. Nuisance and privacy was one of the key issues, and DC Kellogg's PowerPoint told you about the various kind of nuisance privacy issues that were of concern. Location, we can still deal with location, especially as regards property the city owns or controls. Enforcement and emergency authority were the things that emerged from that last study session, bringing me to the ordinance, which is also pretty short. And I guess I draw your attention to it because it's really kind of where we ended up. And you can certainly, you have three doors. There's always three doors. You can say, great, bring this forward to first reading and we're good to go. You can say, let's start over and have something more extensive. Or you can tinker with this a little bit and say, bring it back for study session at first reading. It's pretty short. And let me tell you that I think it addresses a lot of what was the net of what you heard from DC Kellogg. To begin with, it's a new, I put it together as a new Article 10 in Chapter 16. Responding to Councilmember Larson's question earlier, it felt like it was good to put the drone stuff in one place. Now, there are going to be cross-references, but it seemed to work best if I just created a whole new article, not least because it relies on definitions. So if you go to the second and third pages of the ordinance, just those 2 pages, I don't know if you have them in front of you, but we define the things we need to define to be able then to create regulations, not least of which is city airspace, definition for the city manager, including a manager's designee, what a drone is, what a model aircraft is, what it means to operate it, the privacy, which you'll see is important in a minute, and unmanned aircraft system, which is more of a broader definition. Then you get into the operating requirements, and these will look familiar to you as a result of DC Kellogg's presentation. So no drone operations over any city property, including parks, streets, alleys, et cetera, without prior authorization from the city manager. That's what it says now. That would mean that what happened at Anderson Park, you've got to get a permit for that, or what was going on over at the Green. It does say, and I said it, that that authorization shouldn't be unreasonably withheld, but it's important for us not to allow drone use to interfere with the public's use of those parks. And I think it's probably fair to say that the parks are there for, and the streets are there, and the property around the city hall is there for a main reason or two. And it isn't there really to serve as a landing and takeoff location for drones. It can be used for that, but that's not its primary purpose. Sometimes it's a mistake to think about, well, if something's possible to do, then it gets to be first. And I guess I'd ask you to think about that, and that's why this regulation is written this way. It's not a complete prohibition, but it really is putting those operations second, third, or fourth, because there are things that are first, second, and third already on those parks, and I assume we don't want to disenfranchise those. But it's a matter of priorities. We've got this letter B. There's a lot in letter B here, and you'll notice that you shouldn't hover, launch, etc., over private property. Now we're on private property in a way such as to be deemed a trespass, unlawful visual observation, which is a long way of saying voyeurism, etc. And then I've referred to the existing code sections that say you can't trespass, that say you can't have nuisance, that say you can't be a peeping Tom. That's really what, and I didn't need to rewrite those other than to refer to them. So there's a lot in B that covers a number of the things that DC Kellogg mentioned. We've got letter C, letter C next, and that's Amanda Weaver would be happy to see that, and that's why you see that there. It's also a nuisance, just a straight up nuisance. That gets us to authority of the city manager and police chief, because there will be times when you want to be able to allow that. Councilmember Quinn will be happy to see there's including drone inspection of facilities, public utilities. It's in there. And I was going to leave that out and see if you caught it, but I pointed out for it. So there. Now you don't have to highlight it, right? Yep. But as was mentioned by DC Kellogg earlier, there's a real effective use for these kinds of things, but that's the city manager granting that authority. The enforcement is very much, we've got an existing enforcement tools, and you just write them into the municipal court. Although I did say, I think at the police department's suggestion that also we could impound, just like we impound, when you think about it, other equipment or whatever that's being used in a way that's reckless or unsafe. Or maybe we'll be impounding some e-motos one of these days, but I digress. That's the ordinance, but I do want to emphasize that it was pretty narrow as directed by your predecessor council. It's a new day, it's a new council, so you are not bound by that, but I think it's important for you to understand the sort of year-long education that the council has put itself through to get to what we heard back in November. That's all I got.
Can I add one thing to
Please.
that from memory, but I don't remember. I spoke to several people offline and maybe spoke in front of council. Different from the e-bikes, which has basically one lobbyist, the seller of the e-bike. Here, there's a lot of commercial uses and commercial viability, and I think that's why this scope was narrowed with some of the councilors previous, was that we see Walmart trying to get in that space, maybe a DoorDash, really trying to save money and make it a more expedient delivery service tool. So the horizon is very unclear. So I think what we talked about was, let's just get an ordinance on the book that gives us some teeth, to Mr. Dahl's point, and then we're really going to have to watch what the market does, because the back-end providers are going to use this in ways that we haven't even imagined yet, and that's going to be an evolving part of this. So I think that's why we settled on what Mr. Dahl has described.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. Councillor Wood, kick us off.
I just have a couple of down in the weeds clarifications on the ordinance that was written. And it is narrow and it's very succinct, and it makes it so easy to read, which is nice. I noticed in looking through some of the other ordinances, like Cherry Hills Village, they mentioned be in compliance or register with the FAA. That's not said in here, but I would assume that that just happens. In other words, they would be required to do that, whether it says it in our ordinance or not.
It's not there, and it's not there for a specific reason. That yes, to the extent you need to register with the FAA, you do, but we have stopped short of requiring registration by the city, and to the extent, we certainly provide in the ordinance, if you're supposed to be registered at FAA and we check and you're not, then we can cite you. I will tell you, I'm reluctant to do that, because that has the city kind of enforcing a federal regulatory scheme, and shot through this whole thing is my concern with sort of the federal preemption, and trying to chart a pretty narrow course for the city. Do we really need to be enforcing the FAA's registration requirements? And the previous council, and again, I don't mean to rely on whatever the previous council said, you're stuck with in answer to any question you asked me, but we covered that territory a little bit, and I think we came to the conclusion that that was an arena that was covered and was not a good use of our time.
I understand what you're saying, and it makes sense to me. I wanted to ask the question.
Fair enough.
Again, back down in the weeds for a moment. In number A, or letter A, where it talks about drones over city property and trails, playgrounds, parks, open space, is that like parks and open space? Is that regardless of ownership? I mean, for instance, if we had a Jeffco Park in the city limits, would it also apply to that?
No, right now it's city property.
Okay.
It says inclusive of, and then all that other stuff is descriptive of city-owned property.
And
So
if it's not city property, others could regulate it, so.
It's
and
not city
us.
property.
Yeah.
The expectation is that the city manager wouldn't be issuing or not issuing permits
Got it.
for people to fly something on Crown Hill Park.
That makes sense. And then in letter C, when you talk about no person shall operate in a careless manner so as to endanger, and it mentions animal, this includes domestic and wildlife. It's broad because it's just animal.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Like I said, down in the weeds, those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, we're clarifying something over here. Counselor Quinn and then Counselor Larson.
Beat you, Dan. Mr. Dahl, what does, I'll just fall on the sword. I'm XL and I want to fly and take a heat map of all of my overhead lines in the backyard in my neighborhood. Is this through like a permitting thing, or how does Mr. Goff bless that XL can do that?
You write a letter or probably an email to the city.
Okay.
To answer your question, to the city manager saying, hi, we're XL, we'd like to inspect all of the power lines along Wadsworth, that's city property where you can't fly a drone without permission, and we're hereby asking for permission. They're not, as you know, XL isn't shy about asking.
No.
They're not as good about granting permission, but they're good about asking for it.
Just because I'm on a few safety teams at work a little bit, and I get a lot of emails in, and we have a lot of issues with, the AMI meters getting changed out, and a lot of, down and outright violence on that. And I can see somebody wanting to shoot at the drone or something, throw rocks at it or whatnot. I'm just wondering how that's going to work if we want to survey 10 miles of line in a little residential neighborhood, or inspect cross arms or whatever.
Honestly, I wrote the authority for the city manager, city police chief pretty broadly, and I think that means that the manager can issue a permit as broad as the application is, right? Necessarily. But I do think it's important for the city to know that, XL is going to be out flying over Wadsworth on Thursday. The police department needs to know that, just from a sort of public safety as the calls come rolling in. It's well that the city knows and has said, yes, you're permitted from this point to that point and on these days and times, so that everyone knows. But I'm perfectly comfortable with the permit being as broad as the applicant needs it to be, understanding that leaves room for the city manager to say, well, not Sunday, because there's this other event you're not aware of, applicant, that this would conflict with, which lends itself to the reason you have a permitting system, I think.
Would it make sense, or does it even have to be in the ordinance that the utility notify each homeowner that they're flying over, that they're going to be doing this? I'm not sure. I think that would be to be a good neighbor, you would do that, but does it?
It could be a permit condition.
Okay, perfect.
And I appreciate that thought. I'd be inclined to, and what we can do is say such permit shall be issued by the city manager with such conditions and provisions or whatever as needed for public safety and proper implementation of the execution of the permit. Because that way, honestly, the manager could add those as conditions. I'd be happy to add that.
Yeah, I think we'd have maybe a few less calls to each of us, and then, because I know at work we do have these things they call door hangers that they can go through there and say, hey, we're doing something in your neighborhood, or they're supposed to put them down, I should say. I think Google was supposed to as well, but I think that'd be good. Make it, that way we don't all get the phone calls and so on and so forth.
Yeah, we can do that.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Quinn. Just a point of clarification, the city manager and we're over here whispering, and just so you know what we were whispering about in a point of clarification. Actually, this council did take this up last November. So previous council initiated the conversation in 2025, but this is the second time this is coming back to this council. So
Meeting after you were sworn
yeah,
in.
yeah, it was your very, so you're
Yeah.
right. So
I got the notes.
so this is not our first time around this tree. So yes, Councilor Larson.
And thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And I agree with our legal counsel that the sort of broad definition of permit and how it allows the flexibility by the city manager, police chief, given conditions. I do support that. I think it's a very good idea. I'm wondering if this sort of blanket prohibition on using city parks particularly, but other, like a parking lot that might be owned by the city, would it be possible to maybe include something like prohibited over city parks or city property unless so designated, and then at some point there be maybe a section of a park that is the designated drone takeoff area that allows the recreational user to avoid going over somebody's house because it's a public park, and I don't know. Well, I wouldn't want to get into registration saying I'm going to be using my drone at this park tomorrow, but knowing that this corner of a park, you're allowed to use a drone. And it would simply be just, a designated, prohibited except in designated areas. And that would be up to the city to sort of like put a fence, not a physical fence, but like a GPS fence or something.
There's no, it's your property, and so you can govern it as you wish. That'd be something I think I'd want the Parks Department to really think about when they think about their inventory of park property, and whether and to what extent a drone launching site would be a good use, a use that would interfere or not. Having said that, we certainly could add, unless, unless specifically designated by the city for such purpose. And the hesitancy you're hearing is maybe not me being critical of drones, but that when a use is anticipated or permitted, it signals that that it has a priority in some way. And I wouldn't want, I guess, the city to be put in a position of being pressured to designate because there's the ability to designate. That said, and I'm way out in your arena now, which is policy, but I'm just sharing with you that
It's an interesting thought, you know, and certainly from the perspective of our legal counsel, that makes a lot of sense. I'm thinking more in terms of the recreational user and how they would see a public space as some place where they're allowed to do things. Whether that activity takes priority over somebody having a picnic in that spot, that's a question we can wrestle with. The final thing, and this is more of a comment from me, we're looking at dropping this into a new article in chapter 16.
Chapter 16.
Under nuisances, and I guess my comment is that by putting it there, we're calling drones a nuisance.
We put it in chapter 16, which is offenses miscellaneous. If you can find a chapter that's and I'm looking at them now. If we can find a chapter that's more neutral and it doesn't.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
convey a
All right.
pejorative,
I'm
we
one off.
can.
I was thinking 15, but yeah, it is offenses
Yeah, we
miscellaneous.
put under civil disasters and emergencies. Don't want to do that.
I like that.
Buildings, licenses, permits, and miscellaneous. We could put it in chapter 11. That's a little less pejorative.
Yeah, again, the concern is, but I stand corrected on that, and offenses miscellaneous, I think, we are looking to restrict an activity. And so.
I'm okay with the licenses, permits, and miscellaneous, which right now is business licenses, alcoholic beverage, occupation tax, pawnbrokers, social clubs, marijuana licenses. I'm trying to give you a sense of what that chapter.
Keep it away from the marijuana
Yeah.
licenses.
Hotel, tobacco, retail marijuana, that's what that chapter is, 11.
Again, more of a comment, but in thinking about chapter 16 offenses miscellaneous, it does seem to fit. Yeah.
Fair enough.
I'm okay with that unless somebody else has an objection. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Larson. Before we go to Councilmember Ohm, just sort of building off of something Councilmember Larson said, one of my thoughts is I have a constituent in my district who's a passionate drone hobbyist. He's watching right now, I guarantee you. I will probably get a text from him tonight, but one that I have is Creekside Park. It could be a great designated drone park. For a community, its surrounding environs would not be as heavily impacted, just like the landscape of that park. It's a slightly underutilized park, so it could activate the park. So I'd like to propose designating Creekside Park as a allowable space for launching and operating drones, so long as they are compliant with the rest of the regulations.
Up to you, but I'll reprise what I said earlier, which is, so park use is something that both the Department of Parks and Recreation Commission kind of evolves in a sort of thoughtful way, sometimes with public engagement. And I'd be a little, again, your policy choice, but I'd be a little reluctant to sort of impress a park policy use of that park over there
Right.
from the top in an ordinance form, rather than, for example, most other kinds of uses work their way up through, for a given park,
Right.
work their way up through a more engaged public process.
That sounds fair. I guess maybe then what I'm registering is consideration for a designated park, and that conversation could come through our Parks and Rec.
Yeah, I think she'd be well served to get that, and then they may well come back with that.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the council would want to hear from those affected.
That sounds good. Yeah, just in part because we do have people who are hobbyists and they then become professional operators, and those are job opportunities. And there's, a whole bunch of reasons to, support the hobbyists as long as they're mindful. I just showed Mr. Goff a video of a drone that was hovering outside my office window for about 3 minutes a couple months ago, without any other thing it could be looking at other than my office. It was pretty unnerving. So I am a big fan of the rest of the regulatory environment here, but it would be, I think, beneficial for us to look at it as, where would be designated allowable recreation. I'm a little under enthusiastic about within parks or on certain days in certain places. Like, I think, designating 1 or 2 parks where it's an allowed use in the park would be, easier for our community to understand what that environment is, where they can go and they can connect with one another. I mean, that's a great way of building community too. So, all right, thank you with that.
I think we can, let me just say, I think we can accommodate where you're headed and still provide for the sort of ground up policy development by taking Councilmember Larson's suggestion to say, okay, it's prohibited in parks except as specifically designated. That gives you the space in the process to designate, and you hear that designation coming up as you would from Parks Commission in other ways. But it gives them a home for that conversation.
Great, thank you. Councilor Ohm.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I have 2 questions and a comment. The first question is what, just a general, something the police would use that you'd have to go through the special testing, what's a rough radius that those could travel?
What's the radius that the drone can travel?
Yeah, just roughly, not like maxed out, but just like you.
I mean, it's line of sight, so you have to be able to see your drone. If you want to go over the horizon, you have to have a special permit to do that, and that requires a higher level of skill and licensing to do that. So you have to be able to see it is essentially what that boils down to.
And then my second question is, could you launch a drone on any public street?
Right now you can.
Okay. What's
Under
that?
this ordinance, the answer would be no. If you want to do that, you'd have to get a permit.
Yeah. Right now, we don't have any rules, so, you could sit in the middle of your court and launch your drone from there, but, what we're guided by, I think it says in the beginning here, is the FAA rules, which really don't detail anything around that.
Okay, because my comment is that I am aware that right now there's drones that facial recognition drones. That's something kind of new. There's also flock drones. And so combining 2 of those and you launch them from a road, what could the implications be? That's not something I want to discuss right now, but I just want it on everybody's radar. Thank you.
If I might, separately, Mr. Dahl, before I forget, as I was looking through here, the police exemption isn't written into code, but I'm sure you thought about that. And then I thought, well, I'm always thinking about the police, but the fire has drones too, and then wildfire would, so the emergency responder exemption, they certainly wouldn't have to reach out to Mr. Goff in the middle of the night for a apartment fire where they're trying to get an idea.
Very good. Yeah, we'll broaden the first responder category to include those. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Larson.
And just this is more of a editorial correction, basically. Under the, as written, the ordinance would go under section 16.218 definitions, the definition of a drone, that second line there, human pilot aboard and flown autonomously remotely, suggests inserting autonomously or remotely or some other way to separate, because you cannot remotely operate autonomously.
Works for me. I'll add
Vice
or.
versa.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Any further discussion on this? All right, Chief.
The future of drones for policing is these drone hives where they launch autonomously without an operator necessarily. So there is a space where there's no operator, but there's a drone going to a call for service.
Okay.
And it's just dispatched potentially by computer. So
Okay.
there is that to consider in these hive we don't necessarily have the volume of service for it, but there is a potentiality for these hives where they just launch, we get a 911 call, to say there's a robbery in progress, and the drone just goes to that area and gets you an oversight for officers to respond. So I don't know if that needs to be considered anywhere in here, but it is a possibility that is in the future somewhere.
My suggestion, if there's a consensus to bring this ordinance forward on first reading with the changes as discussed during the study session, I'll route this past with the edits that I'm making notes on, past the department and get them to do some nits and nats on it, on that subject and others before you see it.
I guess one thought I have on that, and to a point that was raised earlier around like the future of drone delivery, it's hard to imagine that that drone is going to be within sight distance of the operator. So I wonder if there isn't like a future of drones, and when it gets here, we regulate it instead of anticipate it. So that if the police department is looking into acquiring that, that could be like our first pass at it. And at that point, we could look at remote delivery drones. I mean, there's a whole nother, into Councilor Ohm's point, like there's another level of drone and remote usage that doesn't really seem to be impacting us and hasn't been part of this, but that should it come to our front door, either because the police department's adopting it, or all of a sudden Walmart drones are, showing up in our neighborhoods every weekend, that we could pick it up then when we have a better sense of what that environment looks like.
Of course, like so many things the city regulates, you're never done.
No.
Land use is an example. You will always be amending
What?
Chapter 26, and that's just how it is. And I think you say it well when you say, let's write something for what we presently know, not for what we might imagine, because you've got full power to, in a year, 2 years, whatever it is, when the imagined becomes real, we run an amendment.
Yeah, and if it's happening because our police department's adopting it, then do you have specific plans to adopt it at this point?
No.
Okay.
We have a budget, so. But I would say, and as part of our last conversation, that the FAA is really wrestling with this now. So I don't want to say it's all for naught. I would never say that to Mr. Dahl and all this hard work, but they are wrestling with how this giant, this giant field is going to come under control, and they want to retain the control as much as they can. They've demonstrated that. So to Mr. Dahl's point, we may be back at this sooner than we think, because FAA may weigh in and say, you can't do anything with drones. We're taking all of that back, or we're giving it all to you. It's hard to say.
All right, well, Mr. Dahl, do you have the direction you need and feedback as discussed?
I do, so long as we get the hands up consensus to bring this forward on first reading with the changes as noted during the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful work on this. We really dug into the legal regulatory environment tonight. I thought we were done with land use. I think we had a really tough one the other night. All right, with that, anything from our city manager tonight?
Nothing else from staff. I don't think. Chris, you have anything else worthy, timely?
No, just to say that we had a very
Stay
successful
45.
Carnation Festival.
Oh, yes, thank you.
So that's all.
Wonderful, thank you. Anything from our counselors tonight? What? Counselor Martell and then Counselor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'd just like to remind everybody that our first and third Tuesday of the month, office hours in District 1 are back on. And tomorrow we are switching from coffee to a bit of a happy hour from 4 to 6 at Roll and Smoke Barbecue. So if anyone wants to come talk about anything, join us at Roll and Smoke. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I think I ran into your planning meeting today at lunch. I had lunch there and ran into them having lunch. Counselor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The weekly update is first with the Wheat Ridge Historical Society. I attended the meeting online on Tuesday night, August 10th, and was able to convey the discussion we had previously on the Historical Society and their request. And while I was there, I was given a copy of the letter that went into the time capsule that was buried on the day of the Carnation Fest Parade. A very eloquent letter written by Don Wood, the president of the Historical Society. And he said that our problems and divisions today will be history, and you will be facing your own set of challenges. On the plus side, we've had opportunities our grandparents couldn't dream of, and that will surely be true for you as well, which I thought was a very nice way to put the reaction of the people in 50 years when they open this time capsule that's buried at the Green on 38th. Some of the other wonderful things are in there, but I thought this letter presented that idea very well. The Wheat Ridge Business Association had their monthly meeting on Tuesday morning, had a speaker that really nailed how to have difficult conversations, and I've forgotten what he said already. I'm kidding. Then on Thursday afternoon, there was an online session by RTD where they presented their stakeholders with their first iterations of a plan to take RTD into the 2030s. It involves likely service cuts and service additions in other areas, but they have, it seems, the impression I got is that RTD has recognized that they have to kind of change the way they've been doing things for a while, and they're starting down what seems to be a pretty beneficial path. So that was encouraging. And then Saturday night, my wife and I went to the beer hall at out of Clear Creek Crossing, the new Proust brewery out there. I thought it was very family friendly. All kinds of young parents with their children. And a reminder that this Wednesday, the day after tomorrow, the ribbon cutting at the Proust will take place at, I believe, at noon. So hopefully we'll see some of you out there.
Wonderful, thank you. All I have for everyone is that school is back in session this week, and so encouraging people, keep your eyes open for our kiddos who are out walking and biking to school. I'm actually already seeing sort of increased activity. And I'm really excited at Prospect Valley. There's a parent who's starting a bike train that will have a set route every morning for families to join. And at some point, kiddos can hop on the bike train. And we also have very organized families at Stevens who are encouraging walking and biking to school. And what I'm seeing more and more of are the parents with the e-bikes that have like 2 kids in the back, and they're taking their kids to school that way. And I just can't even state, like, in the 14 years I've been here, 15 years I've been here, like I barely saw other people on bikes, and now we're just really seeing this as a way that people are wanting to get around. So keep your eyes open. I attended the Partners in Progress meeting with Local Works last Wednesday, and their number one item that they were talking about was safe streets to school. And so Local Works is picking up the mantle around what are ways they can be a good partner, both in messaging and working with our communities, with their kiddos in schools to figure out what are some options to make sure that there's safe options for them. So, and then the other thing Local Works talked about is hosting a ballot initiative event this fall. Should we refer the ballot, the initiative to the ballot on Monday when we reconvene? So with that, we are back here in a week for a regular meeting that will include the Dominic Brenton Community Champion Award, and then not too heavy of a calendar event. And then we have a special study session afterwards to look at strengthening some of the civil rights protections for immigrants in our community. So I will look forward to seeing everyone back here in chambers in a week. And with that, I'm going to gavel again. Like that. All right. Thanks, everyone.